All right, these are the notes for Chapter 3, Section 1. That should be your heading. All of Chapter 3 is going to be talking about the Constitution. Here's the objectives of Section 1. The key terms, we're not going to write those down like I've been doing with your study guides. I will only give you the definitions that will be on the test, and you can come back here and look for them. A lot of these we will talk about in the notes. There's quite a few key terms in this section. These are the answers to your focus question, the 6 main principles on which the Constitution is based. They're the 6 listed. And we're in this section of notes, we're going to talk about each of these 6 basic principles a little deeper. So before we talk about the 6 basic principles, we need to talk about how is the Constitution written, how is it outlined, how did the framers create the Constitution. So the Constitution is organized in a simple fashion and is fairly brief. A lot of people think that the Constitution is complicated, mainly because it's written in the terminology that was used in the 1780s up into the 1790s. And so some of their language was a little different. It is a little hard to read, but the way it's outlaid is really not that, it's pretty simple. So the Constitution is organized in a simple fashion and is fairly brief. So the Constitution is organized in a simple fashion and is fairly brief. Oh, I'm sorry, your headline for this, your subheading is Outline of the Constitution. And feel free to abbreviate. You can always just abbreviate like that. These are your notes, so abbreviate words as you need to. So in many areas, it focuses more on principles than specific details. Okay, the Constitution did not get specific. So in many areas, it focuses on more principles than specific details. This helps it guide the nation through changing times, because if they were super specific when they wrote the Constitution, then they knew that in the future it was going to have to be changed a lot. So they wrote it in a less specific way and just talked about the principles of the government. That way that if changes, there would be hopefully less changes would need to be made to it if they didn't write it in a very specific way. Over here on the right is kind of the way that the Constitution is outlined. So there's 7 articles to the Constitution. You've got the preamble, which is the beginning, and then you've got Article 1, creates the legislative branch. You don't have to write this down. We're just talking about it. Article 2 creates the executive branch. Article 3 creates the judicial branch. So there's your 3 branches of government. Article 4 is the relations among the states. So how do the states have to treat each other? Article 5 is about how you can amend the Constitution. Remember, amend means change. So the framers actually created an entire article. Article 5 of the Constitution is all about how you can make changes to the Constitution if needed. Article 6 discusses national debt, the supremacy of the national law, and oaths of office. And then Article 7 is ratifying the Constitution. So the only thing that you need to know here is that the 7 articles of the Constitution are followed by the 27 amendments. So far, since the Constitution was first written, there have been 27 amendments or changes made to the Constitution. So as a change is made, it's added to the Constitution whenever that change may occur. So after all of these 7 articles, the 27 amendments are then listed there. All right, so the first basic principle that the Constitution was founded on, the basic principle of the Constitution, the first one is popular sovereignty. So that's going to be your first heading. What is popular sovereignty? So you're going to have to define what that means. So it's the principle that the people are the only source for all governmental power. So the people are the source of all government's power. the government rules through leaders elected by the people to represent the people. You can always abbreviate government the way that I do. Feel free to pause and write what you need. I'm just trying to make the videos not as long by waiting. The preamble notes the Constitution is created by we the people. We're not going to write that, but that's why the first words of the Constitution are we the people of the United States of America, because the government is ruled by the people. That is the basic principle of popular sovereignty. All right, the next basic principle of the Constitution is limited government. So that's going to be your next heading. So what is the definition of limited government? You can even come here and write the definition over here. So limited government means that government may only do those things the people have given it the power to do. That's what limited government means. Government may only do the things that the people have given it the power to do. So the government must obey the law. No one's above the law. The government must obey the laws of the land. Much of the Constitution spells out. So the Constitution spells out limits on the power of the government. And in this political cartoon here, you can see this giant dog. Sure, he's big, but we hold the leash. So that's a reference to this is the big government, right? But it's limited because all of these people, the people of the United States, hold the leash on the government. That's the principle of limited government. All right, the next basic principle of the Constitution is separation of powers, which is a really important one. So that's your next heading, separation of powers. So what does that mean? So you can even define that here, but it means that the Constitution divides power among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So legislative is Congress, the lawmakers. The executive is like the president, and then the judicial are the courts and judges. So what does that mean? That means that Congress makes the laws, the president executes and administers the laws, and the Supreme Court interprets the laws. So that is the separation of power. And that's important. We're one of the only countries in the world that has such a great separation of power in our government. And the reason for that is stated here in the next one. Separation of powers keeps a strong central government from being too powerful. So it keeps a strong central government from being too powerful. So when you hear central government, to us in America, that means the federal government. So separation of powers keeps the federal government from becoming too powerful. If too much power is concentrated in any one branch, it could lead to abuses of that power. So if too much power is put on in the president's hands, then he or she will probably abuse that power. If too much power is given to Congress, more than likely they will abuse that power. If too much power is given to the judiciary, the Supreme Court, they will probably abuse that power. So the reason for separating the powers is to keep it from being abused by any one branch of the government. All right, so the next basic principle of the Constitution is checks and balances. That's your next heading. So each branch, what we need a definition for that, right? So what is the definition of checks and balances? It's that each branch of the federal government can check the power of the other two. And these are the ways that they can check and the power of the other two branches. So one example, the president can veto bills passed by Congress. And veto means to like throw out or get rid of. But Congress can override a veto if they have enough votes. The Senate can reject presidential appointees or refuse to ratify a treaty. So if the president says so-and-so should be a Supreme Court judge, the Senate can, through interviews with that person, they vote, and if the majority votes that that person should not be a Supreme Court judge, then they can reject that presidential appointee. So that is how the legislative branch can check the executive branch. And then the first example of the president vetoing a bill is how the executive branch can check the legislative branch. Congress can vote to impeach a federal official, so that holds them, knowing that they can be impeached is a check, meaning that that's something that they can do. The federal courts, so this is the other one that we're going to write. We're not going to worry about the impeach one. But the way the federal court or the judiciary branch has a check is that the federal courts can rule that executive, which is president, and legislative, which is Congress, right? So the federal courts can rule that the executive and legislative acts are unconstitutional. So they can say this law that the president created is unconstitutional, or this law that Congress created is unconstitutional, and the judiciary branch can throw that out. So no new heading. This is just the checks and balances continued. So the use of checks is fairly rare. Okay, the use of checks is fairly rare. Compromise is more common. So usually they compromise before they have to check each other. They can reach some sort of agreement. Conflict's more likely when Congress and the presidency are controlled by different parties. So if one party controls the presidency and another political party controls Congress, there's obviously going to be more conflicts there, which we just kind of saw in the last election. So this is a, we're not going to write anything. It's just kind of a diagram that shows us how the checks and balances occur. So this is a good diagram that shows how the checks and balances work. So let's just look at the legislative branch here in the blue. So what can they do? They can override a president's veto. They can impeach the president. They approve the appointments of judges, and they approve treaties. Okay, so that's what they can do. That's how they check. And that check goes here to the executive branch, right? That's how they use these to check the executive branch. And then if we follow this arrow here down to, this is the judiciary, the legislative branch makes the laws. So they may impeach the federal judges, and they can create lower courts. So then how is the legislative branch checked, right? So if we follow this green arrow from the executive branch can veto legislation. The executive branch may call special sessions of Congress. So that's how they check the legislative branch. So they can also, the executive branch can check the judiciary branch, which is down here. This is the judiciary branch. The executive branch carries out the law. So it appoints the Supreme Court judges, and it appoints other federal judges. So that's how they check to make sure that the Supreme Court just doesn't get to pick their own judges. Their judges are picked by the executive branch, but they have to be approved by the legislative branch. So that's how the checks and balances work. And then the judiciary branch has its own checks. So it checks the executive branch